Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're going to talk about housing, and in particular what can be done to accelerate construction of the vital homes that are needed across the UK. Now, the need for housing, and in particular affordable housing, has become one of the most pressing social issues of our time. The current New Homes in New Ways project being hosted at the Building Centre in London makes that point abundantly clear. Too many people are still living in temporary or substandard accommodation, and it's something that for a developed nation like the UK is simply unacceptable. Yet, despite widespread acknowledgement of the problem, progress towards change has been slow. The government's new target of building 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years is ambitious and of course welcome, but it still raises fundamental questions about feasibility, about funding and strategic planning. So what to do? Well, my guest today is Jez Sweetland, founder of the Housing Festival think tank and a passionate advocate for changing the way we deliver housing in the UK. And as he pointed out very powerfully in his opening address to the launch of the New Homes, New Ways event, the fact that 1 in 9 children is homeless in the London borough of Newham is something that should cause us as an industry and as a society to bow our heads with shame. Because building affordable homes is doable. Yes, it requires financial resources and land, and yes, it needs innovative thinking, new materials, new techniques and effective collaboration across a huge number of stakeholders that make housing possible. But all of this is available and all of this is possible. So why is it so difficult? Well, let's hear more. Jez, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Jez, I mentioned New Homes in New Ways at the Building Centre, and in your address at the opening, you referred to systemic failure across the sector, and I tried in my intro to describe the issues. I mean, how bad is UK's housing crisis in reality?
Yeah, I think we've become so used to a housing crisis that we're numb to it. And of course, actually, as that crisis has continued, we now refer to a housing emergency in that sort of desperate measure of trying to get people's attention. How bad is it? It depends what you mean by bad. So for many of us, we're having a great housing crisis. If you own a home, the good news is scarcity of supply means that asset has gone up, and what we've seen is the commoditization of housing. And so therefore, for many of us, I'm afraid there is an element of where the housing crisis is good news.
Right, yeah.
What it means for the public, the wider public and the public sector, is that we are spending out now billions, £2.2 billion a year, housing people in temporary accommodation, which means that we're effectively paying off hostels and hotels and B&Bs and not all bad landlords, but some of these bad landlords have commoditized this opportunity, and we're paying off those private rents, those private mortgages, rather than investing into social housing stock. And that's not to talk about the human cost of this. You referred to 1 in 9 children in Newham. You know, there are schools now where a third of a school class in London are, you know, children travelling miles in. We're housing people away from their communities and their support network. So the real cost of this crisis, the real cost of this emergency is off the scale on a human and economic level.
Yeah, when you described housing as the very fabric of what combines us and makes us human. It's the backbone of civil society, I suppose. I mean, what do you think is at stake for society if this need continues to go unmet?
Well, look, I'm based in Bristol, and our mayor, I'm going to steal a line from him, that, you know, riots are not good for inward investment. And that may sound a bit trite, but I think the reality is that increased levels of anxiety and fear and financial insecurity and poverty, and of course the increased gap between those that are doing well in society and those that are literally left on the margins, that it's not good for society. And at the moment, we had actually riots not long ago in Bristol, but it's not really just about the riots, it's about the functioning of a city as an ecosystem. So to give you a very salient example, we now know that what we're seeing is the ability for a city to function, to retain teachers and nurses, to be able to have, you know, our security officers and our shopkeepers, those jobs that are in place, they're forced further and further out. So in Bath, one of our neighbouring cities here, we're now having to ship in nurses from Newport. Right, so you get this breakdown of the city as a functioning ecosystem. And of course, a lot of us have the luxury of working remotely, but for many people, they don't. And so where does that start to break down our understanding of cities as a functioning ecosystem, let alone the disaggregation of those communities?
Well, you talked about mixed emotions, and I hear the anger and I hear the frustration, but you also talked about hope. The UK housing crisis has not been an overnight problem, it's certainly not an overnight solution. And I understand the anger, but what fuels your hope?
Yeah, well, let me deal with the anger first. I think I am angry in the sense I'm staggered that more of us aren't. When you know, I think the deception is that a lot of us will be confused by looking at street homelessness as the number, but of course behind that is all the what I would call managed homelessness, temporary accommodation, and it's just simply inexcusable, as you referred to, that in a modern society like ours that is wealthy, that we aren't really getting a handle on this. But there's also, I think, the reasons for hope are based on the reality that this systemic failure is of our own design. And the truth, in my view, is very simple, is that the housing crisis is not about a lack of land. It's not about a lack of money. It's about a lack of wisdom in the way that we commission and build and think about social infrastructure. So that means that if we have the wit and the wisdom to rethink some of that system, that the resources are there to deploy in the right way. So I think that there is, and the good news is this is happening in the microcosms all over the country. There are good councils and there are good housing associations making this happen. The problem is that they're the exceptions to the rule, and the scale of need needs this huge fundamental step change in how we deliver and commission that housing.
Because yes, there's some issues that local authorities need to tackle, and there's some issues that central government needs to tackle. But you also talk about the industry, the industry perhaps supporting a failure. What do you mean by that?
So look, I think one of the problems for housing, and let me focus on the housing industry rather than the wider construction sector. But I think let's also just put aside Grenfell for one, because that's, I think, a particular subset of issues. But broadly speaking, there is a massive distrust now in terms of housing developers. It's very rare that you see people welcoming a housing developer to their patch. We see the planning contention, we see the sort of process of don't darken our doors, don't come here, and yet we don't talk about the benefits of housing delivery in those communities. We'll then complain there's not teachers or schools or GP practices, but of course we also know that those services often come when we've seen those developments. So there's a massive distrust. But I think that's compounded by the reality that we have played fast and loose with the major house builders. So they have never said, to their credit, that they are anything else than for-profit businesses. They are not there to deliver social infrastructure. They will, where they are, and I'm going to be blunt, they're forced to, because it's a diminution in their profit, but they are there as for-profit businesses. But what we've done is we've subcontracted full responsibility to those major PLCs to deliver what, in large part, actually is social infrastructure. So they are not really set up to deliver some of that social infrastructure. It's not really their roles, those tier one contractors, those PLCs. They will do it, but they'll do it in a way that is extractive of that land value, which makes it very, very difficult to deliver social rent, etc. Now, the problem with that is it means that we talk about the housing industry and we're not clear whose role is what. Whereas I would suggest that there's a very clear role for those major house builders and tier one contractors, but we probably also need a different development model that can look at social infrastructure and really commission that social rent and affordable housing. But instead, what we've tended to do is beat up those for-profit players in a way that sort of further sows distrust, makes planning more difficult. We're not honest about that debate. And I think for me, that is something we need to be more honest about and more clear about, that you need the right tools and the right levers to deliver the right outcomes, and we simply don't have them.
Well, you mentioned the Grenfell fire, and perhaps we'll get into it a bit more detail later on. But certainly, that really highlighted the failing of virtually every aspect of the housing supply chain, the construction supply chain. I mean, do you see a way that the sector can reform to boost that credibility and get that public confidence back?
Well, it's going to take time, and it's going to take years, and it's going to take, frankly, some honesty around failure. And I think at the moment, as we've seen with some of these, whether it's the cladding or whatever else, that there tends to be quite a transposition and a blame culture. And of course, a lot of the contracting mechanisms with the JCTs, there is a sense of you pass on risk and responsibility down the food chain. And we have a culture where there's more money spent on litigation than there is spent on R&D. And that's symptomatic of a commoditization of housing rather than an understanding around the broader value that it brings. And again, I don't think you can, in a capitalist society, just change that overnight. But I think what you can do is through, better discourse, better regulation, but also recognizing where that model can work well and where that model actually, because of its profit driver, is not going to work well. We need different supply chains. Yeah,
which is why you talk about collective leadership and the need for collective responsibility. So who, in your view, bearing in mind where we are, bearing in mind where we been and what we've seen from things like Grenfell. I mean, who are the key players that need to step up in it, and in what ways?
So I think for me there's a challenge here around where the consequence and cost is felt of not delivering this housing. And what is extraordinary, having done quite a lot of work now with local government, is the cost of housing the homeless, where there is a legal duty, sits within local government. So, and I would applaud that as a wonderful thing, that as a society we have a sense that if you are homeless and vulnerable by no fault of your own, and there's very strict standards there, that local government will ensure you're not left on the street, and then in theory will help you move into more secure accommodation through affordable housing networks. Now, traditionally, there would have been a route through that. We had social rent housing stock, and there was a way for people to get into that stock. Now, I don't want to get into a political debate about right to buy, but what we can say as the stats, that what happened was that when that came in, over the last decade, we built about 85,000 social rent homes, but we lost about 165,000 social rent homes to demolition and right to buy. It was meant to be one for one. And sure as, night follows day, what we now have is about, 106,000 households in temporary accommodation. So that loss of social rent housing has meant that that legal duty to local government is costing us billions in subsidising private rents. So that's the catastrophic failure, really, that we haven't invested in that social infrastructure. We've sold it off. And whose responsibility is that? Well, here's the problem. It's no one's. It's local government, it's regional government, it's national government, it's arguably it's ours, what we vote for. And what I would say is positive right now is housing's right up the agenda.
Well, yeah.
Because it's created that burning platform. I mean, suddenly economists get it. Before we'd have said, oh, isn't it unfortunate there's a few more homeless? Well, suddenly economists are saying, oh, no, that's quite expensive. We need to fix that. So much as I hate the emergency, sometimes you need a burning platform to really get in and fix it.
Yeah, but because we have a new Labour government which has made housing a central plank in its ambitious plans for the first Parliament, including a plan to build 1.5 million new homes, plus £3.1 billion brought forward in the last budget in funding for affordable housing. I mean, is this the collective leadership that you seek? Have they solved the problem? Have they got a pathway to solve the problem?
So the first thing to say is, look, isn't it good news? I think look, wherever you stand in your political worldview, I think if you are involved in housing or certainly social and affordable housing, you would say, fantastic. There's a sense of political moment here where a government has recognised we've got to get ahead of this. It's been left in the wilderness for too long. Good news. There's the other side of that, which says coming up with a figure, as many other governments have done, even with some additional capital funding, is not a plan. And again, I'm going to quote other people here, but, make a plan, any plan, just make a bloody plan. And there is not yet a clear plan around how you're going to accelerate at the sort of scale we need. I mean, the reports from Crisis and Shelter National Housing Federation are saying somewhere in the region of 90,000 social rent homes a year for 10 years. To build back up that social infrastructure, which, again, if you map it from a value for money for the public sector, is probably one of the most important and significant cost interventions you can make. So the problem, therefore, is there's a good moment of political leadership. The question now is, how are you going to deliver a coherent plan that is costed and deliverable? So
what's the plan then? The scale of the task is huge. What would you say? What are the steps? What are the strategies? What do you think that should happen next to accelerate that affordable housing construction programme?
Yeah, and this is one of the things we've been looking at for the last 5 years. And the exhibition, New Homes, New Ways, is I suppose, an attempt to bring together that collective leadership and collective wisdom, having worked with so many people. And what we've tried to look at is breaking down the silos of housing sort of industry, because what we tend to have is we have people that work in land, we have people that work in finance, we have people that work in supply chain, commission, etc. And then you've got planning, that comes along as the evil twin at the end. And I think one of the problems is you've got to bring all that together. If you're really going to start with an outcome focus that says, right, our job here is to massively accelerate social rent housing delivery, you've got to answer 3 simple questions. Where's the land? Where's the supply chain, and where's the money? And what we've done with that is we've started with that I suppose the most difficult pain point, which is that social rent housing conundrum, because that is the most difficult viability challenge. And we said, look, well, where local government has land, and local government does have land, it's incumbent on them to bring that land into play in aggregated quantum, because they can help with that land coming in at essentially zero value. Now, a lot of that land is difficult brownfield land. It's going to be complex to enable, but actually that's a benefit because it's within existing communities. It's within existing reach of bus lanes, etc. So we think that's Absolutely the right response. It's brownfield first. It's within communities, and it doesn't overwhelm existing communities with building massive structures of social rent homes. So that's where we think the land is. That land has been mapped on numerous occasions across the UK, and what we do know is there's a lot of it there. Not all of it appropriate for housing, of course, and that's part of the job to get that right. But I think the next question is then, where's the supply chain? And again, this is what I was referring to earlier with the major sort of PLC house builders. We need them to do what they're doing. They're very good at extracting profit, fine, but they're also incredibly good at managing large, complex, multi-tenure, huge developments that, frankly, I don't want the public sector going too near. We don't want to get in the way of what is a very good, we may not love all that it delivers, but they've got pressures and shareholders to account for, but they do get housing delivery done. There's obviously tramlines government can tweak around future home standards to get better sustainability, etc. But we need them delivering. They're not interested in this land. This is not their land. This is not social rent, affordable. It's not their patch they want to play in. So we need them to do what they're doing. But the UK cannot deliver 1.5 million homes now. We have a productivity challenge. We have an aging workforce. We have more people leaving the construction sector than joining. It's a massive challenge. So we believe, and the proposition here, this is where, and I don't really like this term, but modern methods of construction, DFMA, industrialized construction needs to come in. Post-war, we got quite close to some of these ideas. Not all beautiful, but there's lots of lessons to learn there on acceleration. You need to incubate a new supply chain. And what we suggest there is that what's important is recognizing it's not just a different way of building where we can really drive sustainability and zero carbon into the manufacture process. It's also recognizing it's a different development model. So for some of these SME MMC suppliers, they haven't got capital to go out and buy land. What they want is aggregated demand. What they want is a clear line of sight to get into their production facilities and start to churn out these panelized or volumetric systems. And that's where we think there's a huge opportunity to drive productivity up, incubate the workforce and incubate that new supply chain built around a different business model.
So it's effectively bringing in a whole load of new players into the market who probably hadn't even considered this as a potential market for them in the past.
Yeah, or well, ironically, a lot of them have tried, but local government is a hard nut to crack because of our procurement rules, because of that we're not very joined up with other local governments. So, and of course, actually from a manufactured assembly perspective, what you need is that aggregation. And what we tend to do is to say, we'll give you a little pilot on 6 sites over here or 2 homes over there. Pilots aren't the way to get this done. We've piloted ourselves to death. This is around moving that machine forward into the sort of scale that you need and putting, that real kind of industrial strategy around it, in my view. And that, of course, ironically, has broader benefits because you've increased your supply chain, you've diversified your business model, and you've actually started to bring disruption to the model. So there's more choice around how we commission and build housing. And of course, the wicked problem then is money. And we're talking about billions here. So, this is where it can be quite depressing when you again working in local government, when we see the pressures around temporary accommodation, adult social care, children's services. We've seen local governments go into bankruptcy. There will be more to follow. I mean, it's a pretty bleak picture. So what we are recognising, and again, this aligns with the new government's mandate, is there's got to be a way to unlock that private investment. And so we think there's an opportunity because you've got this guaranteed rental income, that low yield, low risk pension investment where we can get this stock built, we can get it commissioned. But then ultimately, I suppose I see it as a sort of redemption of PFI. Yeah. That there was a way to unlock that private investment. We, local government, are paying out that money anyway. Wouldn't it be better that we did it in public-private partnerships where we end up with that stock coming back to us after 50 years? So it's a long-term mortgage, essentially.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's steps being taken to reorganise pensions right now to try to create that capital, etc. Let's talk a bit about the housing festival in you, because you talked about pilots and incubators. I mean, you're project director and founder of the Housing Festival, which is Bristol-based think tank you set up in 2017. Is it about talking or is it about doing, Jez?
Yeah, so look, the last thing we need is more talking, right? And the last thing we need are more experts. So I think when I got involved, I don't have a housing background. I'm a lawyer by background, and we had an elected mayor in Bristol who ran on a ticket for housing. And what struck me was some of this is about leadership and about how you convene the right partners to get things done. And we stepped in, I confess now, looking back with great naivety, thinking, well, how hard can this be to fix this? But what we wanted to do was in partnership with local government, was make sure that we were delivering. And so the idea with the festival was to set up a 5-year program. We're past that 5 years and we sort of iterated now into a wider initiative, but was to say, look, within 5 years, our job is to bring together industry, politicians, the wider public to have a debate about our housing crisis as a city. And in the midst of that, to actually deliver a load of different schemes that are evidence of the scale of opportunity and the scale of challenge, but that we can navigate together. And we've had some success, we've had some failures, but what it has been about working in a partnership with local government is delivering housing. And we've had some great stories of, I remember the first time I went to Future Ground at the Excel Centre, and I saw my first Z-Pod, which was a sort of zero carbon volumetric house. And I remember speaking to the founder, Bill Dunster, and said, how many of these you built in the UK? And the answer was none. And it floored me. I just thought, this doesn't make sense. This answers a lot of your challenges. So we made a commitment there and then say, we're going to make sure Bristol's the first city to deliver that. And we did. And as a result of that, they've now, so that was the idea. Take ideas and take the pain and the process that it takes to deliver them in and through local government. Because if you can do that, you've created the pathway for other local governments to follow. Yeah,
because you're now an honorary member of REBA. But you say a lawyer by background, and before you launched the festival, you were CEO of a barristers' chambers. Getting involved in housing and housing policy, did it just come out of that passion? That passion for change, or did you have some kind of housing background? Were you a frustrated builder? I don't know. What got you into it?
I had been moonlighting a little bit with some friends. We'd been looking at the refugee housing crisis and started to explore the kind of, again, the sort of brokenness of where, refugees were being put into very expensive hotels, costing the government loads of money, and recognising there was no solution. And so we started to look at that. And then all I can say is the more you look at it, the more my heart was broken for the city. And I thought, it's inexcusable.
Yeah.
And then you start to sort of pick at that and you go, oh my gosh, it's worse than I realised. And it's slightly overwhelming. So I think, again, naivety is sometimes a bit of a superpower. I was in a very privileged position where I guess in my previous role, I was quite well connected into the city in that sense. And I was like, I want to come and help. And I think what I have developed in a career was a role of, I suppose, developing an understanding about what leadership could look like. And so it wasn't about being the expert. It was all about how can we bring the right expert. I couldn't believe how many good ideas I was hearing and how many frustrated innovators were saying, but I can't get a meeting with that person, or this person doesn't understand. And so I've had the luxury of spending 6 years taking the engine apart in local government. And I now have a better understanding of where it works well, but also where it is completely and utterly inappropriate for use, and we need to change it.
I mean, you live in and work in the Bristol area, but of course you get involved with things nationwide. What do you get up to, Jez, when you're not worrying and thinking and planning about housing?
My wife would tell you not much. I'm a bit of a sad geek now these days. But no, look, I'm married. I've got 3 kids. My passion when I can get there is kite surfing. I'll be blunt. I suppose the other reason for me that the house becomes so important is family is important to me. Community is so important to me, whether that's, my immediate, family or that wider community, my church community. These things become often expressed through our place in a city, right? So I think that I'm very rich in the sense of my relationships with family and friends, and I take great value in that. And I think I've become more aware that for many people, that's not something, if you don't have a secure home, you get the opportunity to invest in. And so I try and keep fit. I'm getting older. It's brutal, isn't it? It gets harder.
Well, kite surfing requires a substantial amount of commitment.
Yeah, but you haven't seen me kite surf. So, you should see my kids are a lot better than me. That's the point. But I'll be very lucky to have a play with that. But mainly it's down the gym trying to see if I can still run 10K on a treadmill. But I enjoy that. And I'm very, I've got teenage kids and they're keeping me on my toes at the moment, which is great fun.
Yeah, well, of course, anyone that's got kids is looking in the future and thinking, well, where are they going to live? And it is a driver, I imagine. But huge, ambitious housing goals that we've got in front of us, they do require bold decisions. Yeah. And potentially controversial reforms. So getting back to how you actually solve that, you've talked about not being a tweak to the system. What for you are the sort of the core elements of the housing system that we have right now that need to be redesigned then?
Yeah, so and I think this is where I get quite frustrated, and this is where the anger comes up and the passion comes up again, is, with all the respect to all of the people working incredibly hard for local government and the housing associations trying to tackle this, the reality is that we are falling behind. And so, squeezing a tiny bit more out of the system is not going to be enough. We do need that step change mentality. Again, outcome led. What is it we need to commission? What is it we need to deliver? And so I think there are a couple of things there. I think one is really, if I have another conversation with someone that says to me, but MMC is tricky. I think, yeah, it is. But what's your solution? If you carry on as you are, you're just going to see a dwindling supply chain where costs are going to exacerbate and increase. And so staying as you are is just not good enough. Yeah. So I think there's more around how money is directed and incentivized is the first thing. I think the second thing is planning. And where do we start with planning? I think I have huge sympathy for my planning colleagues. I want to say that's the first thing, and a huge respect for planning colleagues. I mean, what a challenging job balancing so many competing interests. My experience as someone who's trying to commission housing through that process is that it's too difficult, it's too expensive. And the balance of harm, the bits of the planning process that are left to subjective viewpoints have become lost in what I would call that broader, civic responsibility to how a city functions. And that's a complex thing to unpack quickly. But what I mean by that is we need to be more clear about the outcomes cities need to achieve. And the status quo that says you who got there first, you take, it's all on you. You get all the luxury of where the light lands. I'm a bit like, sorry, if you choose to live in the city, and many of us do, you may have a neighbour. And that's part of the realities of living in cities. So I think there's got to be a change there. Now, I know we talk about planning reform a lot. I've lost confidence in waiting for planning reform. I think it's a political football that's very difficult to get into quickly for obvious reasons. And one of the things we've talked about is there other ways within the existing policy frameworks that you can essentially latch onto to drive, again, leadership to accelerate delivery. And something we're looking at is there's a few other things, but one is the local development order that we've looked at, where we're saying, there's an opportunity there to aggregate your land, to then look at a pattern book approach on that land that would effectively create permitted development, that then you can go to your supply chain. Because the dream that we want to look at is how you create aggregation at every level, aggregation of land, aggregation for the supply chain, aggregation of finance. You can't do that without planning de-risk.
No, which is a local development order. That is a route to potentially unlocking those opportunities, bringing all those different parties to play.
Yeah, and look, if I had my planning colleagues in the room, they'll tell you now why an LDO won't work, and I'm sure you're going to get noise off the back of this. But I think the point is that it could work, and one of the concerns is giving up control. And I'm saying, well, let's not give up control. Let's design it really well. I don't want to have a legacy where we've had this really sort of big push to get stuff done, and in 10 years we look back and we went, oh my gosh, we built a load of terrible housing. I don't think that's what this is about, but it is about getting everybody within the whole ecosystem of delivery to say we have to innovate.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid for too many of us, if we've had 30 years of experience doing something, we've got very good at it, right? We're right at the top of our game. We're in charge of a team. We know how to interrogate risk. That's what we're paid to do. And then someone comes along and says, sorry, that doesn't work anymore. Come over here and start again. That's incredibly difficult and vulnerable. And owning the fact that we've got that systemic failure is also quite difficult because that's been on our watch. But I think that's the stage we're at now, is saying, look, it doesn't mean we throw everything out. This is not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but it is saying, can we all please recognise carrying on in the same way that we are is not going to fix this problem.
Which is why you talk about incubating a new supply chain. We've talked about modular and prefabricated construction, but I suppose one of the key things which is potentially stopping that is not having, and you mentioned it, the lack of the skilled workforce that's able to deliver that. How do we upskill the sector to actually take on board these new ideas?
Yeah, and again, incentives and funding and land, right? So housing follows land. I mean, so this is the industrial strategy piece, and I think that some of the work we do with some of the colleges that want to do. I mean, again, this is not to sound too critical, but I think the reality is that we have in Bristol a really good college for modern methods of construction training, and because there's no MMC work, they're teaching bricklaying.
Right. Yeah.
And this is the problem, that if the supply chain is not being sort of supported to get out and build, there's not the jobs. And I think there was this like fallacy that, the workforce would go down sort of like, you're going to speak French or German, you're going to do trad builder MMC. The reality is that supply chain needs to be bilingual.
Yeah.
So we need them to be able to do both, but you can't do an apprenticeship on an MMC project if there's only one and it's only going to be there for 6 weeks.
It's a chicken and egg. It's a chicken and egg.
Yeah. So you have to say what's the outcome, and the industrial strategy follows around that, because we can then incubate that supply chain, create the factories, and create the skills in the supply chain for the workforce. At the moment, we've got lots of training, and there's not the jobs. So
well, I suppose the final point that you made when I heard you speak the other night was, it's a powerful message you left us with, is, recognising it's on us, to make the change happen. I mean, what do you think are the most immediate steps that individuals, maybe listening into this, working in housing related fields, can take to try to begin to drive the change you're talking about?
So what strikes me is we often talk about the housing system, and as if it's this thing over there, as if it's a sort of, but we all, we all understandably play a role. And I think one of the things I often reflect on is that most of us that choose to go into housing, we go into housing because we know it's so important as a job, that is the fabric of our communities and our civic society. And yet the job that we're part of is also now, that system is partly responsible for holding people in systemic poverty. And I think the first thing I'd ask people to is just to acknowledge that, to recognise there is a systemic failure there. And that's not just about us individually, of course it's not, and it's not to beat ourselves up, but you have to first recognise a problem before you can be part of a solution. And I think it's really important that we're educated to know, the harsh reality that we can't build our way out of that crisis with the current supply chains that we have, because scarcity of supply is part of the way that you manage risk, etc. So it's just recognising that and taking ownership of that as the sort of paradigm we work within. I think the next thing is then becoming, as individuals, more articulate in, particularly when we're talking to people about social and affordable housing, about why it's so important for society. And often this gets played out in, dinner table conversations around, affordable housing and the working, the people that are basically scourging off society. I mean, it's and again, if you read the Daily Mail, you would think everyone lives in a council house is basically, just skiving off the state. It's just not correct. I mean, there are so many working poor now who cannot afford a private rent house. So I'm not suggesting that everybody who is a benefit of social welfare is perfect. I'm not. Of course, there are people that abuse any system. But what I am suggesting is that the state we're in now, it's a too binary assumption to assume that we don't need to reinvest in this stock. So again, that needs to be acknowledged. And the third thing is then being much more articulate around the planning dilemma that we face, because the noise that gets made into places around the planning debate, that's personal, it's local. So could you turn up and support a planning application when you see affordable housing planning? We talk about the YIMBY model, the yes in my backyard. I think that can be a bit too binary, because we don't want to see everything built that's bad either. But on the other hand, be invested, find a housing association or an housing revenue account, local government housing, be invested and understand and educate and then support, because it's extraordinary that the only people that turn up to those planning committees are there to say no.
Yeah.
And that creates a really difficult discourse and a really unrepresentative view of what we need to do as a country. So please be involved, be educated, take ownership. Things don't change just from Whitehall. They change because ultimately we take ownership of problems and we're part of the solution.
Jez, your passion really comes through in, loud and clear, and I really hope that that people can take those messages that you put out there and actually turn those into action, because there's certainly action that needs to happen. So thanks so much for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast today. Really interesting conversation about a really important issue. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and giving us some guidance about what needs to happen.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And a little plug, if I may, on the 12th and 13th of February at the Building Centre, we've got a 2-day housing summit around new homes and new ways. So we're talking about this approach, but we've got, actually a really incredible lineup of other experts, not me, but other experts who are genuine experts in their particular niche fields around how we can do this. And this is about, as I said, about educating ourselves as well. And we want to be challenged. We're talking about this as a sweeping arc of opportunity. There's real complex detail to work through. And my point is this: we can work through all of that complexity if we all agree what the mission is.
Yeah.
And that means we need all of those experts around the table to challenge, to probe, we want to be really robust, because I, for one, want to ensure the legacy we leave is going to be better for our children. Yeah. So we'd invite that challenge and that invitation to join in.
Well, Jez, as a trustee of the Built Environment Trust and the Building Centre, I absolutely echo that plea for people to come along. So do join the Housing Festival there at the Building Centre and get involved with that debate. So thanks very much, Jez.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, it's all we've got time for today, unfortunately, but we have got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information to all the issues we talked about today. I'll put some links into some of these events that Jez mentioned and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Jez, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.